Okay, it's been a little while since we've done a bracket, so I thought it might be fun. I feel like brackets are my second specialty, tier lists obviously being my main specialty, but I feel like my brackets are pretty good too. It's been a while since we've done one, and I figured this time we could talk about the most important subgenre of metal, because metal is interesting. I feel like there's got to be more subgenres of metal than like any other genre, right? Like there's probably literally 20 more subgenres that I could have put on here, but I didn't, because the only thing that metal fans love more than arguing about what genre a band belongs in is arguing about which genre is better and more important. Now, before I get into it here, just notice that the title here is what is the most important genre of metal, not the best genre necessarily, the most important one. So what we're looking at here is like, which of these genres has made the most impact? Which one has had the most influence? That is what we're talking about here. No metalcore. That's right. There's no metalcore and there's no deathcore. And I'll tell you why. Because legitimately, my actual legitimate opinion is that metalcore and deathcore are not real metal. I love metalcore and deathcore, but I don't think they're real metal. You know why? Because they have the core at the end. If it has core at the end, it's not real metal. That's just a fact. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is the most important genre of metal. That's what we're going to decide today.
And also, I wanted to mention something new that I'm doing, which is a YouTube coaching program. If you're an individual creator or you're a company, really anybody that wants to grow on YouTube, this is for you. Basically, this is a way to download everything that I have learned about YouTube over the past 7 years from my brain into yours. There's a pretty common set of challenges that pretty much everybody runs into on YouTube. I've run into pretty much all of them. And with this coaching program, I can help you get past those a lot faster than I did figuring it out on my own. For example, in my opinion, the single most important thing for any channel is figuring out the right niche for your content. Like, what should you focus on and how do you talk about it? For example, for me on this channel, once I found that, I went from getting, a couple hundred views a video to tens of thousands of views per video, literally almost overnight. You can see it right here. And also the right approach to things like titles and thumbnails and how to structure your videos to keep people's attention. All that stuff that took me years to figure out on my own through trial and error. I just want to help you speed run all of that. I am super excited about this, and I'm going to be putting a lot of time and energy into it over the course of the year. And if you want to find out more about it, you can just hit the link in the description of this video.
We'll start here on the upper left here. I feel like this is a little bit of an unfair battle, but that's how these brackets work, right? It's like the way you seed a bracket has a lot to do with the finals. So that's what I did. We've got classic metal versus new metal. When I say classic metal, what I'm talking about is stuff like this. I like this song. I always thought this video was hilarious when I was a kid because it was like such an obviously fake video set. And even when I was like 5 years old, I thought this was funny. I love this hook. God, I hate classic metal with all due respect. It's so corny. Yeah, I agree with that too. Now, I picked Judas Priest because I like him, but this stuff really, it's not good. However, remember, we're not just talking about what is good. We're talking about what's important. You got to say, classic metal, even though it probably doesn't really hold up, is it important? I would say yes, it is, because, this really is sort of the foundation for everything that everyone else did. To me, like, metal started getting good in the 80s. And if you listen to any of them, of course, they're all going to tell you they grew up on Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. So even though I'd say it doesn't hold up, I would say it's pretty important, especially compared to its rival here, which is nu metal. Now, this is a tough one, because although classic metal is for sure the foundation of everything that has been done since then, if you listen to bands after, say, the 80s, I feel like more people now would name Korn, Slipknot, Linkin Park as influences even more than Black Sabbath. Like, if you listen to interviews with modern metal bands, not too many of them are mentioning Black Sabbath or Judas Priest or, Motorhead or anything like that. So I think it's genuinely difficult. This is true too. Classic metal feels closer to rock than metal now. I think that's true too. Nu metal has had a bigger impact on newer artists and artists outside the genre of metal. I think that's probably true. So it's a really tough one. But I think I am, in this case, going to go with nu metal as the winner of this bracket. So they advance from the quarterfinals to the semifinals. Next up, we've got power metal versus death metal. Now, obviously, I think we know who's going to win this one. This matchup is a little bit unfair. This is a sacrificial lamb. Yeah, it's a little bit of a squash match. When the UFC's got one of these hot new prospects like Bo Nickel or something like that, yeah, when they feed a journeyman who's 12 and 15 to a prospect, that's right. You got Bo Nickel on the one hand, that obviously they want him to be the next big thing in the UFC, and like, oh, let's give him this 39-year-old that's like on a 3-fight losing streak. Let's give him to Bo Nickel. I feel like that's what's going on here with, power metal versus death metal. I think we know who's going to win this one. But, just to give power metal a fair shot, not good. Yeah, not good. But now we got to admire their CG. Yeah, power metal, aka the pride of Europe. Listen, there's probably a lot of people in Europe right now telling me in the comments right now how important and influential power metal is. I'm sure that's true. And Dragon Force, to be fair, Dragon Force is, I would say, a somewhat influential band, because they were in Guitar Hero and probably got a lot of people to play guitar. So listen, let's give power metal credit where it's due, but really it's not a fair match because, especially when we're talking about comparing it to death metal, to me, like, death metal is such a foundational thing. It's like the essence of so many things that we take for granted now in metal. Classic death metal, I would say, holds up incredibly well. Like, you go back to this is from 1993, I think, right? 92 or 93. I think this holds up incredibly well. What a cool video, too. This is like what every hardcore band tries to sound like now. What a fucking drummer, man. Love Donald Tardy. Very underrated drummer. And of course, you listen to Suffocation, listen to this shit. This is like basically a demo from their EP. They were like 19 years old. Listen to this shit. Imagine playing this when you're 19. And then, of course, moving on into the 90s here, stuff like this. Still just hard as hell. Still sounds great to me. And this is a good point, too. It's crazy how influential the art style of death metal has become. Every mainstream clothing company uses that style. This is very true. So look here, this Deeds of Flesh logo. Look at the font of this logo here. And then look at the logo for Vêtements, the metal version of their logo here. Vêtements, right? You can see where they're getting this kind of influence from. So I would say that, in terms of influence, it's never sold a lot of albums by any means, but death metal has always been extremely, extremely influential. So I would say it's a pretty easy one here. In the totally unfair squash match of death metal versus power metal. Death metal obviously advances to the semifinals right here. Okay, next up, we'll go down here on the bottom right here. We've got grindcore versus prog metal here. Now you might say, wait a minute, grindcore, they've got a core there. That's not real metal. You said there were no cores allowed, but grindcore is an interesting one because there's kind of two versions of grindcore. There's the punk version of grindcore and there's the death metal-y version of grindcore. And I'm talking about the death metal-y version of grindcore here. So all you grindcore nerds here that think that I don't know my shit when it comes to grind, this kind of shit, this would be like the death metal-y kind of grind. Do love that snare sound. And that solid state guitar tone. When I say progressive metal, what would be a good example of progressive metal? I'll say Opeth. Yeah, I'll say Opeth, maybe the definitive prog metal band, maybe, 10 minutes of this. Cynic. Oh, yeah, Cynic. Good choice. How about Cynic? Yeah. This shit is from 1993. They were like 21 or something when they recorded this live in the studio with no motherfucking click track, people. No motherfucking click track on this. 21 years old in the studio. Live in the studio, people. Get on this fucking level. Imagine doing this live in the studio when you're fucking 21 years old. And you know what? For that matter, we've got Dream Theater. You gotta say it like that. Not Dream Theater. Dream Theater. Pull Me Under by Dream Theater. Sounds pretty damn good to me, actually. I legitimately think this sounds good. And you could throw Tool in there too. So the question of which is more influential, it's pretty interesting. You know, prog metal has never sold a lot of albums. This is probably the most popular prog metal song of all time, unless you want to include Tool. Never been a very commercially successful genre by any means, but I would say hugely, hugely influential, right? I would say like progressive metal is almost like the default style for probably like 80% of like bedroom guitar musicians now, right? I don't really know why, but well, I guess I do know why, because if you're a guitarist, it's fun to just write, you know, complicated riffs and, you know, that go genty. So I get it, but it's pretty interesting. So as far as like what is the most important subgenre of metal, I actually feel like progressive metal is really punching above its weight here. Never been very commercially successful, but extremely influential. This one's a pretty easy one to call. Grindcore not only sucks, but also not very important. Only basement dwelling weirdos that collect VHS porn like grindcore. So in this one, it's easy. Prague advances to the quarterfinals, and our last matchup of the quarterfinals here, possibly a tough one here, is thrash versus black metal. Now, the reason why I say that this one might be kind of tough, you might instantly think, oh, well, obviously it's thrash metal because Metallica, the Big Four, Megadeth, everyone's still talking about them. And certainly, I think you've got a good point there. That's true. Black metal has never been very influential in terms of its sound. However, I do think black metal has been very influential as its aesthetic. You've seen the black metal aesthetic used in everything from, you know, KFC commercials, and there's the Lords of Chaos movie and all that stuff. Behemoth was fucking massive. Well, not really. Not really. I mean, Behemoth was like an okay sized band in Europe, but not actually that big of a band. Certainly not compared to like, you know, Megadeth or Metallica. I think the answer here is pretty obviously thrash metal because it's thrash, but I would say black metal is probably more influential than people give it credit for, because like even like normies who don't know or care about metal at all understand things like corpse paint and like black metal logos and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of interesting how influential black metal has become, even though it's not actually popular. The answer here obviously is thrash metal for two reasons. Number one, thrash has also been very influential in terms of aesthetics. Like if you remember a couple years ago, H&M got in trouble because they made a bunch of merch of like fake metal bands and stuff like that. The thrash aesthetic has been co-opted quite a bit too, I think. For example, what's the kid's name? Eddie on Stranger Things. You know, with the James Hetfield circa 1984 kind of look. Yeah, black metal loses but beats the spread. That's right. You know, the answer here, I think, obviously is thrash metal. But let's give black metal some credit for doing better than anybody maybe thought it would. So that brings us to the semifinals. We've got classic metal, power metal, black metal, and grind knocked out of the bracket. Now it is time for the semifinals where things get interesting. So I'm going to start over on the left-hand side here of the bracket where we have nu metal versus death metal. And, you know, this is a tough one. Again, which is the most important genre of metal? In a lot of ways, I think you could say that we wouldn't have nu metal without death metal, because even though I don't think that nu metal was necessarily directly influenced by death metal, I think maybe indirectly they were. For example, like the 7-string guitars and the down tuning and stuff like that. You know, death metal sort of opened the door for all that kind of stuff. You know, in a lot of ways, death metal is the foundation of almost everything that we do. Yeah, you hear it in Slipknot, you hear it in all the deathcore and stuff now. All these like really down tuned, chuggy kind of riffs, I would say, have their origins in death metal. So I want to say death metal. However, at the same time, you can't really deny the impact and influence of nu metal. You know, as influential and as important as death metal is, I think nu metal probably has it beat, obviously in terms of commercial popularity, but not just that. I think in terms of like the aesthetic, there are certainly kids that also look like vintage 1989 death metal kids, but I think the aesthetic of nu metal has a kind of impact and influence that's like even bigger than death metal, you know, reaching all the way into like pop and hip hop and rap and stuff like that. You know, like Playboi Carti, you know, is like very nu metal influenced, for example. And so there's like 17-year-old kids out there who are like Playboi Carti stans, you know, that dress like they could have been in the video set for an orgy song in 1999. You know, I think that as much as I want death metal to win, I think nu metal is the answer. I think sadly, as much as I want it to win, I think, sadly, that's the answer. So we got to go with nu metal. So we've got nu metal here on one side of the bracket. On the other side, we've got thrash metal versus prog metal. And again, I think this is a pretty easy choice to make here. You know, as influential as prog has been, I think this is another case of like the thrash versus black metal kind of thing where, you know, the winner has to be thrash metal, but I think it beats the spread. Thrash is certainly the winner, but prog metal, you know, did better than we thought it would, given that, I mean, think about this. Like with thrash metal, you're going up against the big four. You're going up against Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer, which is, you know, just absolute juggernauts, like literally the most popular metal band of all time. Yeah, I agree with this. Prog was more influential to musicians. Thrash was more influential to the culture. I agree with that. So clearly, like, prog doesn't stand a chance against thrash, but let's give it some credit for punching above its weight. Because remember, we're talking about bands like Meshuggah, Cynic, Periphery, you know, that realistically are tiny bands. Like, I don't think any of those bands has ever headlined a show to maybe more than 1,500 people or 2,000 people. Meanwhile, you know, Metallica is playing stadiums. The fact that it's even like slightly debatable, or the fact that like prog even made it this far. This is like when Randy Couture fought for the heavyweight championship at 48 years old. You know, nobody really thought he was going to win, but the fact that he even made it to the ring at that age was pretty impressive. So I think it's pretty obvious here that we've got to give the W to thrash, but I want to give some flowers to prog for making it this far. So that brings us to our final matchup here, nu metal versus thrash metal. And I think this is genuinely a tough one because, you know, basically what we're talking about here is Metallica and Megadeth, Anthrax and Slayer versus Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, and you know, probably System of a Down or something like that. And it's a genuinely tough one. It's true. Metallica collapsed the USSR. It is true. Thrash, I think thrash metal does win this one because for sure we wouldn't have nu metal without thrash metal. You know, you talk to any of those guys in any of those bands, you know, Wes Borland and the guys from Korn and stuff like that, they would all tell you that Metallica was like a foundational band for them as they were coming up. You know, like when we saw MTV did that thing when all the nu metal bands were covering Metallica, for example. So I think we got to go with that. And as popular as Limp Bizkit and Korn and Linkin Park were, you know, Metallica still just dwarfs absolutely everything. Right? I mean, like, Metallica is one of the biggest artists of all time in any genre, no question. I'd say nu metal because the young generation are still making nu metal and evolutions of the genre. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. You know, it's not an easy decision to make, but I'm going to say that overall, our winner is thrash metal, I think. So there it is, people. There it is. That's my final verdict in our bracket of the most important genre of all time in metal. We're going to thrash. That's my verdict, but it's a close one. It's a buzzer beater. That's true. The real answer is both. We did it again. Metallica, Swizz Beatz, and Ja Rule. It's true. The greatest song of all time. Yeah, before we go, let's listen to that masterpiece. Let's just remind ourselves of the masterpiece that brought it all together. Sounds like it's in slow motion.
Just when you thought it was over, just when you thought we were done, there's cause last brought. 'cause I'm a rock star, baby.
There it is, people. The final verdict, the most important genre of metal of all time. It's thrash. Only basement-dwelling weirdos that collect VHS porn like grindcore